When Michael Rizaldi's headlamp flickered in the depths of Devil's Throat Cave, he had no idea that a simple survey expedition would become the longest solo survival ordeal in recorded history. For 412 days, trapped beneath 200 tons of collapsed limestone with nothing but his wits and whatever he could scavenge from the darkness, Michael would push the absolute limits of human endurance in ways that doctors said should have been impossible. But what mental breakthrough allowed him to survive over a year in complete isolation when most people break within days? Michael Rizaldi had always been drawn to the underground world ever since his first spelunking expedition at age 16, in the limestone caves of Kentucky, now 34, and an experienced cave rescue volunteer, he possessed the technical skills and mental fortitude that few could match his. Weekends were spent mapping uncharted passages and training new cavers in safety protocols. On March 15, 2022, what began as a routine solo survey of Devil's Throat Cave in the Appalachian Mountains would become one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever documented. Michael had grown up in a family that valued preparation and resilience. His father, an Indonesian immigrant who had worked his way up from factory worker to engineer, had instilled in him the importance of never giving up. His mother, a Kentucky native with roots tracing back to coal mining families, had taught him to respect the power of the earth and understand its moods. It was this unique combination of technical precision and intuitive understanding that made Michael one of the most sought-after cave rescue volunteers in the region. Devil's Throat was known among local cavers as a challenging but manageable system, extending nearly 2 miles into the mountain. Michael had obtained the proper permits and filed his expedition plan with the local cave rescue coordinator, indicating he would return by Sunday evening. He carried standard equipment: helmet with LED headlamp backup, lighting systems, rope and harnesses, emergency shelter, first aid supplies, and enough food and water for 3 days. His plan was to map the eastern passage that had been discovered previous year, but never fully surveyed. The cave entrance sat 3,200 feet above sea level, accessible only by a steep hiking trail that wound through dense forest. Michael began his descent at 8 a.m., moving methodically through the well-known sections of the cave. The initial chambers were spacious with cathedral-like ceilings that echoed every footstep. Gradually, the passages narrowed as he moved deeper into the mountain. The limestone walls told the story of millions of years. Ancient sea creatures embedded in the rock formations bore witness to a time when this mountain had been an ocean floor. Michael paused frequently to take measurements and photographs, documenting every detail for the survey maps. His movements were precise, and deliberate years of experience had taught him that haste underground could be deadly. The temperature remained constant at 54 degrees Fahrenheit, providing natural air conditioning against the spring warmth above. By noon, he had reached the unmapped section approximately 800 feet from the entrance and 200 feet below the surface. This was where the real work would begin. Passage here was tight, requiring him to crawl on hands and knees through sections barely 2 feet high. His headlamp beam revealed flowstone formations that had taken millennia to develop, creating natural sculptures of impossible beauty. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional drip of parasum water and the sound of his own breathing. As he worked to survey the passage, measuring distances and taking photographs, Michael noticed something that made his blood run cold. The ceiling showed fresh stress fractures, hairline cracks that hadn't been there in previous surveys. Years of experience had taught him to recognize the warning signs of geological instability. The limestone had been weakened by recent heavy rains that had saturated the mountain above ground. Meteorologists would later confirm that the region had received 3 times the normal rainfall over the past month, causing unprecedented water infiltration into the cave system. Michael made the decision to abort the survey and return to the surface immediately. This was not a decision made lightly. He had spent considerable time and effort planning this expedition, but his survival instincts overrode his disappointment. But as he began his retreat, the mountain itself seemed to exhale. A deep rumbling echoed through the passage, growing louder and more violent. Michael dove forward, trying to reach the wider chamber ahead, but the ceiling came down with force of a freight train. Thousands of tons of limestone crashed into the narrow passage, sealing both ends of the section where he crouched. The sound was deafening, a thunderous roar that seemed to go on forever, followed by smaller crashes as debris settled into place in seconds. Michael found himself entombed in a space roughly 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, and barely 5 feet high. The silence that followed was absolute. His headlamp illuminated a tomb of jagged rock and rubble. The air was thick with limestone dust that burned his lungs and made his eyes water as the reality of his situation set in. Michael forced himself to remain calm. He was alive, he wasn't seriously injured, and he had supplies. Years of rescue training had prepared him for crisis situations, though never as the victim. Panic would be his greatest enemy, and he knew it. In those first critical hours, Michael methodically assessed his situation. The collapse had sealed him into what geologists would later describe as a natural tomb. The ceiling above was solid limestone, reinforced by the very rocks that had fallen. The walls showed no sign of weakness that might allow for digging. His prison was approximately 72 square feet, with a ceiling too low to stand upright. The air seemed stable, suggesting some form of ventilation through microscopic fissures in the rock. His supplies included 6 liters of water, energy bars, and dried food for 3 days, a sleeping bag, and a small camp stove with fuel. Most importantly, he had a satellite communication device, though the signal strength deep underground was virtually non-existent. He managed to send one partial message to the surface cave: collapse, Devil's Throat, Eastern Passage, trapped alive, need help coordinates. Before losing the signal entirely, that single transmission would prove crucial to eventual rescue efforts. But Michael had no way of knowing if it had been received. Above ground, Michael's failure to return by Sunday evening triggered the cave rescue protocol. His girlfriend Sarah contacted the local authorities, and by Monday morning, a full search and rescue operation was underway. The rescue team, led by veteran cave rescue coordinator Jim Patterson, immediately located Michael's vehicle at the trailhead and traced his route to the cave entrance. What they found was devastating. The entrance chamber had partially collapsed, and the eastern passage was completely sealed by an estimated 200 tons of limestone debris. The rescue team faced an impossible challenge. Traditional cave rescue techniques were useless against such a massive collapse. Heavy excavation equipment couldn't reach the remote location, and even if it could, the vibrations might trigger additional collapses. Engineers from the State Geological Survey examined the Dapperby Bend site and delivered crushing news. Any attempt to dig through the collapse could destabilize the entire cave system, potentially killing Michael if he had survived the initial collapse. By the end of the first week, the official rescue was suspended. The risk to rescue workers was deemed too great, and the chances of Michael being alive seemed increasingly remote. The local media covered the story extensively, interviewing cave experts who explained the virtually impossible odds of survival in such conditions. But as days turned into weeks, public attention faded. Sarah refused to give up organizing volunteer efforts and maintaining vigil at the cave entrance. She knew Michael better than anyone and believed in his ability to survive against impossible odds. She spent her days researching cave survival cases, studying geological reports, and consulting with experts around the world, searching for any precedent, any hope that might guide a successful rescue. Meanwhile, deep underground, Michael had settled into a routine that would sustain him for the unimaginable ordeal ahead. He rationed his initial supplies carefully, but knew they would last only days. His survival depended on finding alternative resources within his rocky prison. The cave provided 2 critical elements: a steady supply of water dripping from limestone formations, and surprisingly, a small ecosystem of cave-dwelling creatures that would become his lifeline. The water was mineral-rich but safe to drink. After filtering through layers of limestone over thousands of years, Michael used his clothing as makeshift filters, removing sediment and debris. The flow was slow but consistent, providing approximately 1 liter per day if carefully collected. The creatures were another matter entirely. Collapse had disturbed the colony of cave-dwelling bats, and several had been trapped in his chamber, along with various insects and small arthropods. The idea of eating them repulsed him initially, but Michael understood that protein would be essential for long-term survival. He had studied survival manuals and knew that squeamishness could be fatal in extreme situations. As his initial food supplies dwindled, Michael faced the harsh reality of his situation. This was not a temporary emergency that would be resolved in days or weeks. This was a fight for survival that could last months. He began to develop more sophisticated strategies for finding and preparing food. The bats provided the most substantial nutrition, but catching them alive required patience and ingenuity. He fashioned traps from his equipment, using metal components from his pack to create simple snares. He learned to identify which insects were safe to eat and which should be avoided. The cave environment provided natural refrigeration, keeping any food he managed to procure fresh for extended periods. The psychological challenges proved even more formidable than the physical ones, confined to a space smaller than a prison cell. With no natural light and minimal movement possible, Michael battled depression, claustrophobia, and hallucinations. He developed a strict daily routine to maintain his sanity: exercises within the confined space, meditation sessions, and detailed journaling using a waterproof notebook he carried for survey work. He wrote letters to Sarah, to his family, to friends, never knowing if his words would ever be read. Active writing became a lifeline, connecting him to the world above and maintaining his sense of identity and purpose. He rationed his battery power carefully, using his headlamp only when absolutely necessary for essential tasks, spending most of his time in complete darkness to conserve energy. The silence was profound, broken only by the steady drip of water and his own breathing. He began to notice subtle sounds he had never heard before: the settling of rocks, the movement of air through tiny crevices, the scurrying of small creatures. Sounds that became his companions in the endless night. The most difficult period came during his 4th month of captivity, when winter began to set in above ground and the temperature in his chamber dropped to dangerous levels. A section of the chamber wall began seeping water more rapidly, creating a small pool. Initially, Michael celebrated this additional water source, but the increased moisture brought new challenges. Hypothermia became a constant threat as the damp cold penetrated his bones. His clothing remained perpetually wet, and he developed painful sores from lying on the jagged limestone floor. The cold was so intense that he could see his breath in the beam of his headlamp when he dared to use it. His fingers and toes began showing signs of frostbite, turning white and numb for hours at a time. He knew that without proper treatment, frostbite could lead to gangrene and death. But there was no treatment available in his underground prison, only the will to survive and whatever makeshift solutions he could devise using strips of fabric from his clothing. He created primitive bandages, wrapping his extremities to maintain circulation and warmth. It was during this dark period that Michael made a discovery that would prove crucial to his survival. While exploring every inch of his prison for the 100th time, searching desperately for any advantage, he noticed air movement near the discave floor along the western wall. The sensation was subtle, barely perceptible, but his heightened senses detected the faint current of moving air. Digging carefully with his hands and tools, he uncovered a narrow fissure that connected to a small adjacent chamber. This space, roughly the size of a closet, contained a larger bat roost and, more importantly, cave formations that provided better water collection. The discovery reinvigorated Michael's will to survive. The additional space allowed him to stretch fully for the first time in months, and the better water source improved his overall health significantly. The new chamber also provided access to a larger population of bats and insects, expanding his food options considerably, though the diet remained grim and barely sufficient to sustain life. Michael began to develop more sophisticated survival techniques, creating traps for the small cave creatures that wandered through the fissure, using limestone to filter water, and even cultivating a small amount of cave moss that grew in the moisture near the water seepage. The moss provided minimal nutrition, but every calorie counted. In his desperate situation, he learned to identify different types of bat droppings, some of which contained undigested insect parts that could provide additional protein. Though the thought disgusted him, his body's need for survival overrode all squeamishness. he developed a system for preserving food using the natural refrigeration of the cave environment to keep meat fresh for longer periods, and rationing everything with mathematical precision to ensure maximum longevity of his meager supplies. The psychological toll was immense, but Michael forced himself to focus on the technical aspects of survival, treating each challenge as a problem to be solved, rather than an insurmountable obstacle. As winter deepened above ground, the temperature in Michael's chamber dropped to what felt like near freezing levels. The combination of cold dampness and malnutrition created a perfect storm of physical deterioration. His body weight had dropped by nearly 60 pounds, leaving him gaunt and weak. His muscles had atrophied from months of confinement and minimal movement, making even simple tasks exhausting. His hair began falling out in clumps, a sign of severe nutritional deficiency, and his teeth became loose from lack of proper nutrition. Despite these physical challenges, his mental resilience proved remarkable. He continued his daily routines of exercise, meditation, and journaling, maintaining a structured schedule that gave meaning and purpose to each day. He created elaborate mental exercises, designing imaginary construction projects in his mind, and solving complex mathematical problems to keep his intellect sharp. The isolation took its toll in unexpected ways. Michael began having elaborate conversations with imaginary companions, created detailed fantasy scenarios about rescue, and sometimes lost track of time entirely. He carved marks in the limestone to track days, but occasionally forgot to make marks, leading to confusion about how long he had been trapped. His sense of time became fluid, with periods that felt like hours stretching into what might have been days. The absence of natural light cycles completely disrupted his circadian rhythms, making it impossible to distinguish between day and night. His body adapted to a strange schedule of sleeping and waking, based entirely on his energy levels and the completion of survival tasks rather than any natural rhythm. He developed an intimate relationship with the subtle changes in his environment, noticing variations in air pressure, water flow, and temperature that indicated weather patterns on the surface above. During his 8th month underground, Michael experienced what he would later describe as his darkest period, when a severe infection developed in one of the sores on his leg, caused by constant contact with the damp limestone floor. The wound became inflamed and began producing pus, filling him with fear that sepsis might set in without antibiotics or proper medical care. Any serious infection could be fatal in his weakened condition. He used techniques he remembered from wilderness: first aid training, cleaning the wound with filtered water, and using strips of clean fabric as bandages, but the infection persisted for weeks, causing fever, chills, and delirium during the worst moments. He hallucinated seeing rescue teams that weren't there, and hearing voices calling his name from the sealed passages. The fever broke after what felt like an eternity, leaving him even weaker than before, but somehow still alive. His body's immune system had fought off the infection through sheer determination and whatever nutritional resources he had managed to maintain. By his 10th month underground, Michael had adapted to his subterranean existence in ways that seemed impossible to outside observers. His body had undergone profound changes. His eyes had become extraordinarily sensitive to light, able to detect the faintest variations in darkness. His hearing had sharpened dramatically, allowing him to identify different creatures by their movements and breathing patterns. He could navigate his chambers in complete darkness, using only touch and sound, developing an almost supernatural awareness of his environment. His sense of smell had also intensified, helping him locate food sources and detect changes in air quality that might indicate danger or opportunity. He had learned to sleep in positions that maximized warmth and minimized pressure on his injured and sore body parts, becoming expert at finding the few comfortable spots on the unforgiving limestone floor. The mental challenges continued to evolve as the months passed. Michael developed complex coping mechanisms, including detailed visualization exercises, where he would imagine himself in favorite locations from his past, hiking through forests, feeling sunlight on his face, and enjoying meals with friends and family. These mental journeys became so vivid that he could almost taste the food and feel the warmth of the sun. They provided psychological nourishment that was as important as physical sustenance in maintaining his will to live. He also began conducting imaginary conversations with experts in survival, psychology, and cave rescue, discussing techniques and strategies with mental versions of people he had worked with in the past. These conversations helped him analyze his situation objectively and develop new approaches. To the challenges he faced each day, he created mental maps of cave systems he had explored in the past, using these exercises to maintain his technical knowledge and expertise, even while trapped in his limestone prison. After more than 13 months underground, Michael had developed an almost mystical connection to his cave environment. He could sense weather changes on the surface through subtle variations in air pressure and humidity changes that occurred days before they might affect conditions in his chamber. He had learned to predict the behavior of the creatures that shared his space, understanding their cycles and habits well enough to optimize his hunting and trapping efforts. His body had stabilized at a dramatically reduced weight, but had found a sustainable equilibrium, where his reduced caloric intake matched his minimal energy expenditure. He moved with careful, deliberate motions, conserving every ounce of strength while maintaining the physical activities necessary for survival. His daily routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of survival tasks, each performed with ritualistic precision that helped maintain his mental stability. Above ground, Sarah had never stopped believing in Michael's survival throughout the winter, and into the following spring, she organized search efforts, consulted with experts, and campaigned for renewed rescue attempts. Her persistence finally paid off when she connected with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, geological engineer specializing in cave rescues. Dr. Rodriguez reviewed the site with fresh eyes and proposed a revolutionary approach. Instead of trying to dig through the collapse, they would drill a narrow rescue shaft from the surface directly to Michael's estimated location using ground-penetrating radar and seismic analysis. They had identified what appeared to be a void space in the approximate location where Michael should be trapped. The drilling operation would be expensive, dangerous, and technically challenging, but it represented the first real hope for rescue since the initial collapse. The drilling operation began in late February 2023, using specialized equipment designed for deep-water well drilling, adapted for cave rescue operations. The process was painstakingly slow, requiring precise navigation to avoid destabilizing the cave system. Each day they advanced only a few feet through the solid limestone. The drill team worked around the clock, knowing that if Michael had somehow survived this long, time was running out. The operation drew renewed media attention, with reporters and camera crews returning to the remote mountain location to document what might be either a miraculous rescue or the recovery of remains. After more than a year underground, the drilling team faced numerous technical challenges, including equipment failures, weather delays, and the constant risk that they might be drilling into empty space, chasing a ghost signature on their geological surveys. On April 2023, after drilling 187 feet through solid rock, the drill bit suddenly dropped into open space. The team immediately lowered a fiber optic camera into the hole and made contact with what appeared to be a living person. The figure that appeared on their monitor screen was barely recognizable as human, emaciated beyond belief, with long matted hair and clothing that had deteriorated into rags. But the person moved and responded to light from the camera. Michael, hearing the mechanical sounds from above for the first time in over a year, crawled toward the noise with what remained of his strength, and found himself staring up at a tiny circle of artificial light. The voice that came down the shaft was barely recognizable as human. Michael had not spoken aloud in months, and his vocal cords had atrophied. Disuse. His first words were a whispered, "Hello, is someone there?" followed by uncontrollable sobbing as the reality of potential rescue overwhelmed his carefully maintained emotional control. The rescue team immediately began widening the shaft. While medical personnel assessed Michael's condition through the narrow opening, they lowered a small video camera and communication equipment, allowing them to conduct a preliminary medical evaluation. What they saw shocked even experienced rescue professionals. Michael appeared to weigh less than half his normal body weight. His skin was pale and translucent. His eyes had adapted to darkness to such an extent that normal light caused him severe pain. But remarkably, he was conscious, coherent, and able to communicate his vital signs while weak appeared stable, His blood pressure was low and his heart rate elevated, but within survivable ranges. The medical team began immediately lowering supplies, including IV fluids, high-calorie nutrition supplements, and medication to stabilize his condition for the extraction process ahead. The extraction process took another 18 hours, as the rescue team carefully widened the shaft to accommodate Michael's removal. They had to proceed slowly to avoid causing a collapse that might kill him after surviving so long. Underground, Michael had to be sedated and placed in a specialized rescue capsule. Due to his extreme sensitivity to light and his weakened condition, his body had adapted so completely to the cave environment that exposure to surface conditions posed serious medical risks. The rescue capsule was equipped with controlled lighting, heating, and medical monitoring equipment, allowing the medical team to gradually acclimate him to surface conditions during the extraction process. When the capsule finally reached the surface, the assembled crowd of rescue workers, media representatives, and medical personnel fell silent at the sight of what emerged. When Michael finally reached the surface on April 20, 2023, he had been underground for 412 days, setting what experts believe is a record for solo survival in a cave environment. The medical team that received him was astounded by his condition, despite losing nearly 90 pounds. Suffering from severe malnutrition, hypothermia, and multiple infections, his vital organs remained functional. His psychological evaluation revealed remarkable mental resilience, though he would require extensive therapy to readjust to surface life. Most significantly, his detailed journals provided unprecedented insight into long-term solo survival psychology and human adaptation to extreme environments. His survival had challenged conventional understanding of human endurance limits and provided valuable insights for future rescue operations. Michael's reunion with Sarah was captured by news cameras and broadcast worldwide. As he emerged from the rescue capsule, shielding his eyes from the spring sunlight he hadn't seen in over a year, Sarah was the first person he saw. Clearly, their embrace marked not just the end of an incredible survival ordeal, but the beginning of Michael's long journey back to the world above. The cave that had held Michael prisoner was permanently sealed by authorities, but not before researchers conducted extensive studies of the site. Michael's survival became a testament to the ever-present squirtings, extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, and the power of hope in even the darkest circumstances. In the years that followed, Michael became an advocate for cave safety and worked with rescue organizations to develop better protocols for cave emergencies. He never returned to recreational caving, but his experience underground had given him a profound appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of life. Above ground, his 412 days in darkness had taught him that the human capacity for survival extends far beyond what most people could imagine, and that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones that test not just our physical limits, but the very core of who we are today. Michael lives quietly with Sarah, treasuring simple pleasures that most people take for granted: the warmth of sunlight on his face, taste of fresh fruit, and the comfort of sleeping in a bed. His survival story serves as an inspiration to anyone facing seemingly impossible odds, proving that with determination, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable will to live, the human spirit can overcome even the most challenging circumstances nature can devise.